looking at Texas A&M, well, let's just kind of size it up from here. The biggest news during the offseason was, of course, bringing on Bobby Petrino as offensive coordinator. So through 5 games, what would be your assessment there?
I mean, I would say so far, pretty much a rousing success. The biggest thing that A&M fans wanted to see, I think, right off the bat was just whether this offense was going to be different, whether it was going to be just a higher in name only, or if it was actually going to be some substantial changes. And we've definitely gotten that. I think you've seen a lot more just aggressiveness as far as getting the ball downfield, but also just a lot more use of tempo. And that's not to say it's a super fast offense, but it's not just the bleed the play clock down to 5 seconds like you saw under Jimbo for a long time. So, but yeah, early returns for A&M fans, I think, are pretty ecstatic. A&M's been over 400 yards of offense in every single game so far this season. They've scored at least 27 points in every game this season. And so when you averaged 22 a year ago, being 27 or north, I think it's hard to complain too much about that. And I actually heard I think it was Connor O'Gara on another interview. He actually threw out the stat that the last time that a Jimbo Fisher coach team scored 27 plus in 5 straight games, it was in 2014 with Jameis Winston. So safe to say that you've seen a big change on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, the other big news, obviously, on that side of the ball just happened here in the last couple of weeks with Connor Weigman, and that's unfortunate to see. The game that I watched pretty much every play was the Miami game, and despite, depending on your perspective, you could call it a lopsided loss. You could say, well, Texas A&M with about 5 or 6 minutes left still had a shot there once he pulled off a 4th down touchdown play to get him within a score, but with little else supporting him in regards to a running game and with the defense giving up points, he had to throw it 53 times, and he was getting hit back there on a regular basis and just delivering play after play after play. And I just gained a lot of respect, not just for his talent, but his ability to lead and be tough and hang in there.
Yeah, and Wegman, you're right exactly. In that Miami game, as rough as that game was for A&M fans, that was a pretty crushing loss in week 2. The one big silver lining out of that is everyone's like, okay, but no, Wegman is a dude. Wegman can play. But of course, it was only 2 weeks later. He goes down in the Auburn game, ends up being a broken ankle that's going to need surgery, and he's done for the year. So, that for most teams, I think that would totally tank your season. I'm not sure A&M's in that spot because you bring in Max Johnson, who is one of the best case scenario backups that you can find in the SEC, maybe in all of college football, just because he's a 4th-year player who has been a starter before, both at A&M and at his previous stop at LSU. The guy's thrown for over 4,000 yards in his career. So, you couldn't ask for a guy that's more ready for that stage to come in. And Max obviously came in that Auburn game, somewhat sparked the offense in the Auburn game that was kind of stagnating early, led A&M to victory in that game. And then, of course, again, this past weekend versus Arkansas.
Bobby Petrino now takes over the offense. How do you think that transition has taken place?
I think it's been great. And I think the biggest thing, everybody in the media outside of really Aggie media, now some in Aggie media, were discussing the relationship between him and Jimbo Fisher a little too much. Obviously, Bobby Petrino's personal past is his personal past. Every coach has gone through similar things that we don't always bring up in discussion. But when it came to Jimbo Fisher's play calling supremacy over his time at Texas A&M, it hasn't been great. He had a couple good seasons where, because of the O-line play and because of quarterback Kellen Mond and his, I guess, consistency as a good enough quarterback to get the offense going. They always had good run games, but really it was the dominance in the trenches to control the clock, score as much as you had to, and play competent defense. And that's what got him through the 2020 season. It's still his best season yet at A&M in the COVID-inflicted year. I think they had 3 or 4 games that were called off because of COVID. But since then, he hasn't had that structure he needs every season. He needed to get the offense going. in terms of explosive plays, getting downfield at a faster pace, finally recruiting, the quarterback they needed to run that type of offense in Connor Weigman. His season-ending injury was a gut punch this year, and if it wasn't for Max Johnson, who I guarantee we'll talk about in a little bit, we wouldn't have the same outlook going forward this season offensively. But as we all know, Bobby Petrino, especially Arkansas fans, Louisville fans, this guy is still one of the best play callers in the country. He's very scheme oriented. He knows how to get playmakers in space. He's been doing that already with one of the best wide receiver cores in the SEC with Evan Stewart, Noah Thomas, Anais Smith, obviously, Moose Muhammad, and a couple of good freshmen that we will probably see later this season. So I don't have a problem at all. Honestly, at Aggies Wire, anywhere else, all we've had is praise for what he's done. Even in the loss to Miami, the defense was the biggest issue. But honestly, offensively, they were still moving the ball. They still scored 33 points. They had chances to actually get even closer. It was just the defense and special teams issues that really got that game put that game out of reach. So I think it's been a great transition. I think that the relationship between him and Fisher has been completely amicable. It's been very professional. It's great to see Fisher on the sidelines without all the pieces of paper in his hand and the play sheets, and he's just managing the game like he should. But Petrino is just calculated. He knows what he wants. He's shown in the last two games that even when the offense wasn't moving the ball much in the first half against Auburn a couple weeks ago, Johnson coming out in the second half, relieving Weigman after his injury, it was surgical. I mean, one of the best passes of the year to Evan Stewart in the end zone, and really it's every part working together. The O-line is playing better each week, so I'm not just going to say it's pure play calling. All the pieces need to fit. But overall, you just see like I said, you see wide receivers not just running tight routes, not getting lost in congestion in the middle of the field. It seems like somebody's open on every play, and it's been very odd to see for the last couple seasons when really it's been anemic offense under Fisher over the last two seasons.
Yeah, Max Johnson, I don't know that he gets the credit or recognition he deserves. He had a nice season at LSU a couple of years ago, 27 touchdowns, 6 picks. But beyond the numbers, because I've seen him post a few games where the numbers didn't look good, but he had to watch the game because this guy, from what I've seen, is as tough as nails. He'll stand in the pocket and deliver a football with a helmet in his ribs over and over and over. And we'll deliver it usually on time and in a tight window. His ball placement's really good, and he's proven to be a leader.
I will defend that guy anytime. He will make some mistakes, and he did against Arkansas. I think he had a couple turnovers, obviously the pick six at halftime, which we all drummed it up to this. That's just the Southwest showdown every year. I mean, it's just the weirdest game. It doesn't matter how bad Arkansas is, how bad A&M is, who the superior team on paper is. They're both going to show up in some way. I think really A&M escaping that game 34-22 was mainly on the back of Anais Smith's 85-yard touchdown return and running the ball effectively. But there were mistakes by Johnson, but there was a throw, I think it was the first touchdown pass to Evan Stewart. That was a pro throw. I mean, this guy has the arm talent. He has the mobility to actually make plays out of structure, as we've seen. I think he had like a 30-yard run in the game. Kid's got some wheels, which is impressive. This was a guy, I think a lot of people are saying, oh, he's a pure pocket passer. He's gotten more athletic, as a lot of these quarterbacks need to if they want to make it to the next level. And really, when we talk about drop off from Connor Weigman to Max Johnson, there may be little drop offs in terms of quick release and, the rapport that Weigman may have had with some of the receivers, but I think it's getting better every week. And we saw that in small doses against Arkansas in the 2 offensive drives that led to touchdowns.
Oh, absolutely, Mark. I remember vividly Max Johnson a couple of years ago at LSU, where Alabama had the 20-14 win. That came down to the wire. Max Johnson made big throws in that game. and stood in the face of Will Anderson coming at him, Dallas Turner coming at him, big Fedarian Mathis coming at him. Max Johnson took some shots, but he stood right there and made a lot of plays and nearly pulled that thing out for LSU. So we know that young man is tough as a big price stake. We know Max Johnson is a tough dude, and he's going to be asked to do it again with the Dallas Turner coming at him, with the Chris Braswell coming at him, a Tresman Marshall coming at him, and multiple other guys. But fortunately for him, he does have talented pieces with Evan Stewart, also Anaya Smith, who is back for A&M, and Anaya Smith taking this game very personal. Very personal. We saw the clip of him talking about his brother Maurice Smith, who played under Nick Saban at Alabama from 2013 to I believe 2016. Maurice Smith played for the program, and the situation that happened there about Maurice wanting to transfer to Georgia in the SEC, and the SEC kind of holding up that transfer, and Nick Saban had his own thoughts about that as well, which ultimately, Maurice did end up getting that transfer and playing for the Bulldogs, but that still kind of stung up Anias a little bit. So he takes this match very personally, and it kind of adds some chippiness there to the fire. So it's going to be fun to watch that whole thing unfold. But, Max Johnson, tough guy. He's got SEC experience. It's going to be a very fun matchup.
I think in every matchup, you're seeing Evan Stewart kind of come in his own as the predominant star guy who can line up at any position in the wide receiver rotation. And he can really expose you because of his lateral quickness, because of his deep threat ability, his very soft hands. This is a guy who is only a sophomore, has already broken the 1,000-yard receiving mark in year 2, and he actually missed a game already this season. So he's somebody who week to week, based on his health, he did have a scare, kind of a concussion scare after the Arkansas game. Jimbo Fisher said he should be good to go for the Alabama game this weekend. But Anaya Smith is really the bread and butter. And, it was really a beautiful thing to see his redemption game, from last year, breaking his leg. It's ending a season which he had high hopes for this team, and many of us did as well. And obviously other injuries piled on after that just didn't help their cause. But to see him, lead the team in receiving was 71 yards, to have a beautiful 85-yard punt return in a key moment in the game where they really needed to score again to end this thing and get out of there with the W. Obviously, guys like Moose Muhammad and Noah Thomas. Noah Thomas opened the season with an incredible 3-touchdown game, and many of us thought he was on the track towards immediate stardom. He slowed down. He had a personal tragedy that occurred last weekend, and he did miss the game. He did miss the matchup last week, but I think he's a guy who could make his mark again this weekend, mainly because of his height, because his mismatch ability downfield. But it's fascinating to see how fast these guys have developed over the span of 2 seasons, when they were kind of thrown in the fire and dealing with adversity week after week. I believe A&M had a 6-game losing streak last year, and Stewart was the leading receiver in nearly every game.
Maybe the most talented A&M has been at the skill positions on offense in recent memory, because you talked about Evan Stewart and Anaya Smith out at receiver. You've also got Moose Muhammad, who is another slot receiver that comes off the bench. And one guy that had a great start to the season and then has been a little more under the radar is Noah Thomas. He's a guy, goes about 6'5", had 3 touchdowns in the first game of the year, another one against Miami. But then you kind of haven't seen him as much since. I think he's been battling injury, battling some personal stuff as well, some family issues. But I wouldn't be surprised if he's another guy that at any given moment could make a big play, make a game-changing play. And then at running back, you touched on it. It started off the year as more of a 3-headed monster with Le'Veon Moss, Amari Daniels, and then also the true freshman Reuben Owens. And you're still seeing a mix of all 3 of those guys, but the past 2 games, you really have started to see Le'Veon Moss, I think, assert himself as that lead back. He had 15 carries for, I think, 97 yards and a touchdown against Auburn, and then 17 carries for over 100 yards this past week against Arkansas. So it seems like A&M thinks they've found something with Moss, and he is a very, like, he's quick, but he's a very physical runner. Great between the tackles guy. So I think especially against Alabama, you're gonna see them probably try to feed him early and often to try to establish that run game.
And we certainly don't want to forget about the offensive line. The recruiting has been top notch there as well. Is that unit living up to expectations?
Offensive line was maybe the biggest question mark on the team going into the year, because last season it was not good either, both in run defense and pass protection. They had some issues, and some of that was youth, some of that was injury. I think they had 10 different players actually make a start on the offensive line last season. They lost Bryce Foster, our center, for the season last year early on in the year. So the point is, going into this year, there was a lot of promise. You had a lot of returning production. You theoretically brought back all 5 starters, but you just didn't know what you were going to get from that group. And it's been a mixed bag, I would say, because the first few games of the year, especially running the football, they really failed to establish a dominant running game, even against some substandard competition. And you referenced against Miami. Miami threw some blitz packages at A&M that they did not handle well, and Wegman just kind of got battered in that game as a result. I think the good news for A&M is it does seem like every single game they're taking steps, they're getting better. Every game you're seeing the run game be more effective. I think the past 2 games, it may even be the past 3 games, A&M hasn't even allowed a sack. So they're giving their QBs time. The running game is still, I would say, it's a dominant run game, but they're starting to be effective in the run game that in a way that maybe they weren't early on in the year. And it's what you hope for a team that's still kind of figuring itself out, is that what the team that you saw in week 1 is going to be very different from the team that you see in week 6, week 7, on through the rest of the year.
Talking defense, Stephen, Deontay Lawson, can you give us the circumstances involving that injury and how that's going to affect personnel on the defensive side?
Well, right now, Lawson did injure his ankle against Ole Miss a couple of weeks ago. He definitely missed Mississippi State and could miss multiple other games just due to it's a bit more severe than what was initially laid on. So he couldn't miss his A&M game. We'll watch him this week in practice to see how he looks, how he progresses. But right now, missed Mississippi State, could miss multiple other games down the stretch here. But when you look at now, Jahad Campbell is the immediate next guy up at that weak side linebacker position. He was the immediate backup behind Lawson. Campbell, a former 5-star from New Jersey, played well against the Bulldogs, actually led the team with 14 tackles, did have his first career pick. So Saban happy with his progress and his progression behind Jahad Campbell. Bama also has Justin Jefferson, who can play at that position, the JUCO linebacker. It's got Sean Murphy, who can play at that position. Also, Ian Jackson, who can play at that spot. Another guy, Kendrick Blackshire, the former 4-star from Duncanville, Texas, though he is the backup at middle linebacker behind Tresman Marshall. Kendrick Blackshire can play at that spot. Also, keep your eyes on former 5-star from Thompson High School here in Alabama, Jeremiah Alexander. He was recruited to be an outside linebacker, but is now getting some work inside due to the injury that happened to Lawson. So Alabama's got some depth there at that position, but right now where Lawson is concerned, yes, missed the game against Mississippi State, could miss multiple other games as well, starting off here with Texas A&M, but it comes down to how does he look this week in practice. The team will be out there today, following what it did yesterday. If Lawson can continue to take some strides forward, maybe we could see him against A&M, but as of right now, he looks to still be questionable.
Robert, of course, 7 sacks and 15 tackles for loss is some serious damage in the opponent's backfield. KJ Jefferson's one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the country, and they really, they had defense aided points. They had a late touchdown that didn't matter. The A&M defense certainly did a job there. Nobody's going to sell the Auburn offense as being a thing of beauty either. They have all sorts of issues at quarterback and throwing the football downfield. However, again, it's still an SEC team with athletes all over the place, and they needed to scoop and score to provide their touchdown. Couldn't score on offense. So the defense really shaping into form with, again, a lot of guys that were familiar names from top-notch recruiting classes becoming elite level type players.
Yeah, the defense has been a beyond pleasant surprise over the past few weeks, because I think most people saw that Miami game and they saw that defense get torched. Not necessarily in the run game. They actually did pretty well against the run in Miami. But just Miami threw the ball all over that A&M defense. And we all kind of said, oh, here we go again. It's, we finally got the offense fixed, but now the defense is going to be an issue all year. And I don't know if it's what they've done schematically is different. I'm not a big X's and O's guy. Or if it's just something has changed in that room, because you referenced, 7 sacks against Arkansas, 15 tackles for loss against Arkansas. They did the same thing, those exact same numbers against Auburn. And as you said, maybe 2 offenses that aren't going to finish at the top of the conference at the end of the year, but I don't care who you play. If you get 7 sacks and 15 tackles for loss, that's a dominant defensive performance. And that's against, we saw Auburn just take Georgia to the wire a week ago. We saw that same Arkansas offense put up, I think, 34 against LSU. So they're not just completely incompetent. But now, are you going to see A&M put up those kind of numbers every single week? No. They're going to face better offenses. I think they're going to probably face a better one this Saturday. But certainly, especially on that defensive front, they have really, truly started living up to, I think, that recruiting prowess that we all saw, because as well as A&M has recruited just as a whole in recent years, the defensive line recruiting has just been otherworldly. Like that, and that 2022 class in particular, you look at A&M had something like 18 top 100 recruits, and 6 or 7 of them were defensive linemen. It was absurd. And you kind of wonder, it's well, how are they going to play all those guys? But now you're starting to see where almost all those guys are getting run, whether it's in blitz packages, it's third down packages. They have just wave after wave of that blue chip talent that for the past 2 weeks, in SEC play really has pretty much asserted its will on the opposing offenses. So as an A&M fan, you just hope and pray that continues.
Looking back at Mississippi State, Stephen, a bit of a rough start for the offense and all around. Couple sacks on the first few drives, a false start, couple 3-and-outs, throw in a muffed punt, and things got off to a rocky start in Starkville.
They did. It was a lot of miscommunication there on the offensive line. Also, Jalen Milroe needing to understand, when to throw the ball away when there's not anything there. The first few sacks that he took of the offensive line gave him time to throw the football, but Milroe got to have that clock in his mind where if there's nothing there, just throw the football away, play the next down, the next possession there. And the muffed punt, that was something where Kool-Aid McKinstry not quite, I guess, recognizing, judging where the ball is going, and along with that, not fielding the ball as cleanly as what he would like to. That's something that he will get better at and will fine-tune and improve on. But there were times there in that first half there, Mark, where the offense and special teams, as far as the return game is concerned, was sputtering a bit there until one Miss Terry got her own husband, Nick Saban, fired up and had him chewing people out as he normally would do prior to the last few years. And maybe Miss Terry ignited her husband to get back to, being a bit fiery out there.
Run heavy, 43 runs, 12 passes. That includes, of course, Jalen Milroe taking off a few times and a few designed runs for him. Your thoughts about the run-pass ratio? Jalen Milroe was effective in a limited role in terms of throwing the ball downfield, 10 for 12.
I don't think Alabama needed the passing game in this matchup right here. I did like the run game showing up a bit more. You did have near 200 yards rushing, 3 rushing touchdowns. Jace McClellan got involved. Roydell Williams had 44 yards rushing, so I like the balance there. And I felt like Saban kind of wanted this to be more of a gritty, grinded out type of game, especially when you look at taking on Auburn down the road, LSU down the road, Arkansas down the road, of course, Texas A&M this weekend. However, I feel like this week you want to see more of that passing game open up. A&M, one of the best teams in the country in terms of sacks in the top 5. They are going to stack the box and force Jalen Milroe to beat them throwing the football. So I think this week you want to see more of that passing game open up. But last week, because of the fact that State's defensive secondary kind of suspect, if you will, Saban wanted to kind of win this game from a gritty, grinded out perspective.
7 sacks for A&M against Arkansas. They had 15 TFLs in that game. They were living in KJ Jefferson's lap. My goodness, they were just feasting on that offensive line and living in the backfield. Many of the names that we've seen as 5-star recruits through the last few years, especially on the defensive side that were, bound for Texas A&M, we're now seeing those guys become major forces in the SEC.
We are, and that's going to be the biggest key for Alabama this weekend is that offensive line, primarily at left tackle. Whether it's Caden Proctor, whether it's Elijah Pritchett, that left tackle is going to come to play because they're going to be dealing with a lot of these stunts, a lot of these blitz packages, a lot of this movement that A&M's going to try to create there on one Jalen Milroe. So there's offensive line from the center, Seth McLaughlin, and getting these snaps in order, whether it's Seth McLaughlin snapping it, whether you choose to put Darian Dalcourt back there at that spot. You got Terrence Ferguson, who's got some versatility as a center and as an offensive guard. Whomever they have snapping the football, that has got to be right there. You can't have the pre-snap penalties at Kyle Field, which causes the crowd to get way more into it, which ignites more of that defensive line pressure. The offensive line has got to have one of its best games of the year this Saturday.
Getting back to this running game, the yards per carry this past weekend, Jace McClellan a little over 4 yards per carry, Roydell Williams at a 4.4, and they're a little bit better than that on the season, but we're not seeing the dominant numbers. Najee Harris, I would say, would be the last guy that was a dominant star running back at Alabama, featured back by himself to a certain extent, and not seeing 6.5 yards per carry like we did a few years ago.
Some of that is geared toward the offensive line, Mark. I guess now kind of starting to find themselves. You look back at that 2020 offensive line with Najee Harris. You had Landon Dickerson, who was the big glue guy at center. He kind of kept everything policed there. You had Alex Leatherwood, who had a ton of experience. You had Evan Neal growing into his own. Deontay Brown, a lot of experience there at that guard position. So that 2020 group had a lot of guys that kind of knew who they were and what they were. This group right here has kind of had to grow slowly into what it is. I know there was a lot of talk in the offseason about this group wanting to be physical, wanting to make teams quit, that type of deal. And this group has experience also. But I think now playing well together and gelling well together, that's kind of starting to now take shape, going back to the second half against Ole Miss. And then when it got its footing going there against Mississippi State, I feel like this group knows how good it can be, but it's about challenging itself to know that, hey, we can play better than what we're playing and proving that. And I think this group is starting to kind of prove to itself that it can be that group. So it goes as far as what the offensive line takes it.
I would say the opener, they showed a little bit in the opener against New Mexico, and then the UM Monroe game right after the Miami showing was still, we were seeing flashes of these guys. But going back to the Miami game, I really think a lot of that was just scheme oriented. It was just, DJ Durkin has been under fire for a while. He's in his second season as a defensive coordinator. I believe it was only a couple of us who blatantly called him out after the Miami loss of, you're not utilizing your talent correctly, because you're right. It's, I feel like every outlet this summer was talking about how, Texas A&M is kind of wasting that 5-star talent across the defensive line because they keep building and building and building and getting nearly every 5-star blue chip prospect along the defensive trenches. And it's kind of incredible. They just landed 2024 5-star Dominic McKinley less than a month ago. And that was after, one of their worst showings. So what I've seen from Durkin is finally utilizing blitz packages, and by utilizing his athletes is setting some of your faster guys off the edge, utilizing twist and stunts, making sure that these guys aren't just going hat on hat to gain pressure, but they're finding the weaknesses across the offensive line and they're exposing them immediately. But I've got to give a ton of credit to the linebacker core of Edgerton Cooper, who's been outstanding. He's leading, I believe he's leading linebackers in sacks this season. And freshman Torian York, who out of Temple, Texas, was a 3-star recruit, was committed to Duke, was committed to Baylor, had offers from Duke and a couple other lower Power 5 programs. But chose A&M, was unbelievable in the preseason and gained the starting position immediately. All of us were a little confused by that, because if you're giving the line calls and all the defensive calls to a freshman, you must have a ton of confidence, and he must really know what he's doing with, the guys in front of him, who a lot of them are, juniors, sophomores. Like you said, Walter Nolan going to his sophomore season, played a lot last year. But I really think it's a brand of physicality, confidence, and again, blitzing. And that's when you have that speed and that strength and that size all across and coming in droves, the depth is incredible. It's hard to handle. I mean, especially when SEC play keeps going, these guys are getting more confident. All I'm seeing today, with some of the interviews that these players are giving at Texags, is just these guys are beaming. I mean, these guys see the numbers. They saw the performance. This wasn't, flash in the pan like a lot of people may think it is. But I don't see a lot of SEC teams really blocking them very well going forward unless they are completely prepared for what they're going to throw out at them week to week. So it's good for them that finally these 5-star prospects are playing well and they're living up to their potential. But I think a lot of it is just belief in themselves, belief in Durkin's scheme, and really just coming together at the right time.
A&M comes into the SEC. There's a lot of hope there, despite not winning a conference title in the Big 12 for a long time, going back to 1998. But the recruiting footprint, Johnny Manziel obviously made his splash. Kevin Sumlin was doing well in recruiting. You bring on a big time coach who's won a national title. Alabama's just Alabama. And there's just been some type of buzz or energy around this game and this matchup for several years now.
The thing that's exciting for A&M fans is it kind of feels like this is the first year where we've gotten to the week of the game, and the game actually looks like it's going to live up to all that hype that we had heard about it. Because for the past 2 seasons, in 2021 and 2022, you had A&M ranked in the preseason top 10. You had a lot of that back and forth with Jimbo and Saban over NIL and recruiting and all this. But then each of the past 2 years, A&M was already a 2-loss team by the time this game came around. And so as far as actual SEC implications, it was kind of dead in the water. Now, those ended up being 2 great games. Of course, both, as you referenced, both decided on the final play. But for A&M fans, I think it was a little bit hollow because even in the year that we won, you still knew we still needed a ton of help if we actually wanted to win the SEC. You needed Bama to lose another game. You obviously had to pretty much win all of your other games the rest of the way. So, and this is the only time since 2016, I believe, where you have A&M and Bama facing off, where the winner is going to be by themselves in first place in the SEC West. So, yeah, for an A&M fan, it's not just about playing Bama. Everyone, loves playing Bama, gets up for that game. But the fact that it also means that we're playing meaningful football in Week 6. We're not just sitting here, just hoping to win a game just to piss in Bama's Cheerios.
Jimbo Fisher, obviously, much controversy around him just based on how much money he's making versus the results and what the expectations were and what he's being paid to do. I believe this is year 7? 6. Year 6. Yeah, so we're looking at 2018 being year number 1, and the records have basically been Kevin Sumlin records. I've seen that comparison made a zillion times after 50 games, after this many games, after that many games, and that's what it is at this point. Is there any real thought that if this season doesn't meet expectations, whatever those are, I don't know, I would have my certain expectations. I don't know what they are for the powers that be. That Jimbo Fisher, despite the massive buyout because of the deep pockets, that there could be a change.
I mean, I think that's on the table. Certainly, everyone involved hopes we don't have to go down that road, because the hope is that we, do have a good season, and you have an outcome where you can say, okay, no, like, we feel like things are back on track. This team has a positive outlook on the future, and everyone moves forward with Jimbo, and everybody's happy. But whether that's, and I don't know what the exact number is either. I always kind of put it like, if A&M went 7-5, I really do feel like they probably would find the money for that buyout, because as insane as it is, like, it's north of $75 million that they would pay him to walk out the door. I mean, if you're going 7-5 a year after you went 5-7, I think just the writing on the wall would be, this is not working. And ultimately, as big as that financial hit would be, you run the risk of doing more long-term damage to the program by keeping a guy around that if he's not the guy, and your opponents know he's not the guy, recruits know he's not the guy, you could tank your program for 5-10 years if you wait too long, and then you're just playing catch up for what you should have done 1 or 2 years ago. But hopefully things go well and we don't have to cross that road.
It is kind of an interesting football program, Robert. I'm not sharing anything new with you. When you combine the resources and the state of Texas, where football is king, it's so important. So you add up a lot of positives in terms of a rabid fan base, resources, Texas, the SEC, all those things coming together. Then you look at this history of fielding good football teams, but not great football teams, not reaching elite status on the field, not winning a conference championship since '98. I don't know that there's another program out there for the length of time. You can look right in the state at Texas and say, okay, well, they've underachieved for close to 15 years now, but just prior to that were obviously national championship game appearances and titles. I got to think that I don't even know where this fan base's collective thoughts are about, can we finally get there?
I mean, I think A&M fans are, I wouldn't say impatient, but certainly A&M fans, I feel like that we are doing all the right things, just as fans, as a school, as a football program, that, A&M technically checks all the boxes that you would want to build a great college football program. Like you said, you've got a rabid fan base in the largest stadium in the SEC. You're in the middle of one of the biggest recruiting hotbeds in the country. You play in one of the premier conferences. There's whether it's financially, geographically, there's really not many better places to be. And so it seems like A&M should have all the ingredients to make that happen. And so is it frustrating that it really has not come together? Yeah, I would say so. And I think specific to the Jimbo Fisher era, that's why Jimbo was brought in. That's why they paid him that huge contract, because they wanted someone with those skins on the wall that had done it before to come do it here. And I think that's still on the table. I think especially kind of the trajectory of this team that we're seeing this season. I think most A&M fans are feeling really good right now. But yeah, in the long term, I think everyone's ready for it to happen, because there's no reason that it shouldn't. A&M is not in Indiana or Ohio, or not Ohio State, Iowa State, and that's no disrespect to those programs. They occasionally will have great years and occasionally have better years than we do. But I think those programs, if they're being honest, would say, yeah, but we know that, like, resources wise, and when you put all the ingredients in the pot, we know, like, we're not going to be Ohio State. We're not going to be Georgia. And I think A&M says, look, we don't have the winning tradition of those schools, but outside of that, there's nothing else that we lack for. And so we're ready to take that next step.
Absolutely. All right, everyone, get geared up for Alabama and Texas A&M. Join Robert at Good Bull Hunting there on SB Nation. Robert, we appreciate you stopping by, breaking things down for us.
Absolutely, man. Gig 'em.